In a freezing blizzard, a skinny, exhausted dog lay beneath a tree, while the entire town kept their distance, throwing food from afar. They thought it was a threat, but no one realized it was still holding its position like a soldier, until one man stopped, a Navy SEAL who didn't walk away, but stepped closer. He didn't try to save it right away, because he understood that some beings don't need saving, only understanding. But when strange tracks appeared in the forest, and a pack of K9S began to reveal themselves, everything changed. The dog was never truly abandoned. It was standing between two worlds, forced to make a choice. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, like, and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 followers, so we can keep telling meaningful stories. Now, let's begin the story. The snow did not fall. It pressed down thick, relentless, as if the sky itself had grown tired of holding its weight. Northern Montana wore winter like a scar that never healed. The road into town was barely visible now, swallowed by layers of white that erased direction, erased memory. Even sound moved slower here. Boots sank, wind dragged, breath turned to vapor and disappeared before it could belong to anyone. And at the edge of that road, beneath a weathered pine tree that had outlived more winters than anyone could count, something lay still. It was a dog, or what remained of one. A German shepherd, old, but not in the way time made things gentle. This was the kind of old that came from surviving too long where others didn't. 8, maybe 9 years, the age when a working dog should have been resting somewhere warm, on bones stiff but safe. Instead, this one lay in the snow. Its coat, once thick, sable-toned in shades of cream, gray, and black, was now matted into frozen clumps. Ice clung to its fur like a second skin. There were places where the hair had thinned, revealing pale, weather-bitten flesh beneath. A tear at the shoulder-deep once, now sealed by blood that had frozen into a dark, jagged line, told a story that no one had stayed long enough to read. Its ribs showed with each breath. And yet, it was not curled into itself. The dog lay with its back pressed against the trunk of the pine. Its body angled, not collapsed. Its head slightly raised, muzzle pointed toward the road. Eyes half open, watching. Always watching. It was not the posture of surrender. It was a position, a final one. The town knew about it. People passed that road, though fewer did these days. When they did, they slowed, but not enough to stop. They looked, sometimes. Most didn't. There had been talk. "A stray," someone had said. "Not a stray," another corrected quietly. "Too aware." A man Tom Willis, a mechanic with thick hands, and a tendency to fix things that weren't his, had tried to approach 2 days ago. He'd taken 3 steps into the snow, boots crunching too loudly in the silence. The dog had not moved at first. Then it had risen. Not fast, not reckless. Just enough. And it had growled. Low, controlled. Not fear. Not rage. A warning. Tom had stopped. He hadn't gone closer. No one had since. Sometimes someone would toss food from a distance. A wrapped piece of meat, dry kibble in a plastic bag. The dog would not move until the person had left. Sometimes it ate. Sometimes it didn't. Sheriff Nolan Briggs had come out that morning. He was a man shaped by years that didn't ask for permission. 53. tall but slightly stooped from old injuries that never fully healed. His face was carved by weather-creased lines at the eyes, a jaw that held tension even at rest. His hair had gone mostly gray, cut short beneath a worn hat. A sheriff's badge sat on his chest, dulled by use rather than neglect. He stood at a distance, boots planted in the snow, gloved hands resting at his sides. He watched the dog for a long time, longer than anyone else had. "Not a stray," he muttered. No one asked him to explain. He didn't offer. Because some things, if you had to explain them, people wouldn't understand anyway. By the time Caleb Vance saw the dog, the storm had worsened. He hadn't meant to come into town that day. Caleb Vance moved like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, even in open ground. 35 years old, around 6 feet tall. Lean, compact strength, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that endured. His face was clean-shaven, the lines, sharp square jaw, defined cheekbones, and features that seemed permanently set into a kind of quiet readiness. His skin, though naturally fair, had been weathered by years in harsh climates. Cold wind had left its mark, subtle, but undeniable. His hair was dark brown, cut short in a military style, though slightly longer than strict regulation. Enough to suggest that he was no longer bound by it, but hadn't fully let go either. His eyes were gray-blue, and when they settled on something, they didn't rush to judgment. They observed, measured, remembered. He wore the same thing he always did. An old tactical combat shirt, olive gray, the fabric softened by time and use. The cuffs were frayed, the shoulders slightly worn where gear had once rested. Beneath it, a dark red thermal layer peeked through at the collar, a quiet contrast to the muted world around him. His combat pants were just as worn, earth-toned, knees scuffed, pockets slightly sagged from habit rather than neglect. Old work boots, scuffed and reliable. A military watch on his wrist, scratched but functional. He stepped off the road without thinking. Only when his boots sank deeper into untouched snow did he realize he had already changed direction. Toward the tree, toward the dog, he stopped a few meters away. Didn't speak. Didn't move closer. The wind howled between them, dragging loose snow across the ground like restless spirits. The dog did not lift its head higher, but its eyes shifted. And for a moment, just a moment, those amber irises locked onto his. Caleb felt it. Not fear. Recognition. Something in his chest tightened, not painfully, but with the weight of something remembered. He had seen that posture before. Not here. Not in snow. But in a place where the air tasted like dust and metal, where silence meant danger and movement meant survival. A dog lying still, not because it was weak, but because it was waiting. The wind surged, sharp and sudden, and sending a wave of snow across the ground. In that instant, Caleb took one step forward. The dog moved, not fully, not even standing. But its body shifted subtly, precisely. Its weight adjusted. Its front paws pressed into the snow. Its head lifted just enough to change the angle of its gaze. And its eyes didn't harden. They calculated. Caleb froze. Because that wasn't the reaction of a dying animal. That was a trained response, a perimeter adjustment. Even now bleeding, starving, barely holding itself together, it was still holding its ground. Caleb exhaled slowly. White vapor drifted from his lips and disappeared into the storm. "You're still on duty," he murmured, barely audible over the wind. The dog didn't react to the words, but it didn't look away. That was enough. Caleb shifted his stance, not advancing, not retreating, just changing his angle slightly, reducing his profile without even thinking about it. Old habits. On both sides. He noticed the wound again. Left shoulder. Not fresh, but not fully healed either. Torn flesh that had frozen, likely reopened more than once. There were other marks, too. Scars hidden beneath fur that no longer sat smooth. This wasn't a dog that had wandered out here. It had come from somewhere. And whatever it had come from, it had survived longer than it should have. Caleb's jaw tightened. There was a memory there, one he didn't visit often. A flash of heat instead of cold. A handler shouting over gunfire. A different dog charging forward when it shouldn't have had to. A decision made too quickly. Or maybe not quickly enough. He blinked. The present returned. The snow. The tree. The dog. Still watching. Still holding. Caleb crouched slightly, not fully kneeling, just lowering his center of gravity, making himself less of a threat. Not out of fear, but out of respect. The dog's ears twitched, not relaxed, not aggressive, aware. "All right," Caleb said quietly. No command in his voice, no expectation. Just acknowledgement. He didn't reach out, didn't offer food, didn't call it over. Because something in him knew. Instinct deeper than thought that this wasn't how you approached something like this. You didn't save it. You waited. You let it decide. The storm pressed in harder. Snow gathered on Caleb's shoulders, on his hair, on the worn fabric of his shirt. It didn't seem to bother him. Minutes passed. Or maybe longer. Time moved differently in the cold. Finally, Caleb stood. Slowly, deliberately. He didn't turn his back immediately. He stepped backward once, twice, creating space again. The dog didn't follow. Didn't relax either. It simply watched him go. As Caleb reached the edge of the road again, he paused. Just for a second. Then he glanced back. The shape beneath the tree hadn't changed. Still there. Still holding. Still. Not surrendering. Caleb nodded once. To no one. To nothing. To something. Then he turned and walked away into the snow. Behind him, beneath the pine, the dog lowered its head a fraction. Not in defeat. Not in rest. Just enough to conserve what little strength remained. Its eyes remained open, fixed on the path the man had taken, as if marking it, as if remembering, as if somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath the cold, beneath everything that had stripped it down to this final position, something had shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But something that hadn't been there before. And in the silent language of creatures who had both seen too much. That was enough for now. The storm did not end. It simply thinned like a breath held too long, finally released in uneven pulses. By the next morning, the sky had turned a dull, exhausted gray. Snow still fell, but slower now, drifting instead of striking. The road reappeared in broken lines beneath fresh powder, as if the world itself was trying to remember what it used to look like. Caleb Vance stood at the edge of the same road again. He hadn't planned to come back. That was the truth he didn't say out loud. His cabin sat a mile out, tucked between frozen trees and silence. It had everything he needed: wood, water, distance. Enough space to exist without being seen. Enough quiet to keep the past from getting too loud. And yet, sometime before dawn, he had found himself awake. Not startled, not restless, just aware. And the kind of awareness that didn't come from noise, but from absence. Something unfinished. So he had dressed the same way he always did. the worn tactical shirt settling against his shoulders like a memory he refused to fold away, boots laced without looking, watch strapped tight. And he had walked back. Now he stood again, a few meters from the tree. The dog was still there. Alive. Barely. The position hadn't changed much, but small details told a different story. The body had shifted overnight, slightly angled now, as if the animal had tried to conserve heat against the trunk. Snow had built up along its side, half burying its hind legs. Frost clung to its whiskers. Its breathing was slower, but steady. Caleb let his eyes move carefully, not locking too long in one place. He noted the wound again left shoulder, still closed, but inflamed. The edges had darkened, not from fresh blood, but from exposure. There were new marks in the snow. Tracks, not from the dog. Around it, a loose arc. Several impressions, spaced unevenly. Caleb crouched slightly, scanning without stepping closer. Coyotes, maybe. Or something larger. They had circled during the night, tested, and left. He exhaled quietly. "You held them off," he murmured, not expecting a response. The dog's ear flicked. Not toward him, toward the wind, still listening to something else. Caleb stayed where he was for a long moment. Then he did something different. He stepped back. Not away just enough to widen the space between them. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket. No sudden movement. No sound beyond the quiet shift of fabric. He pulled out a small piece of dried meat. Nothing special. Just something he carried out of habit more than hunger. He didn't throw it. He didn't extend his hand. He lowered himself just enough, placed it in the snow halfway between them, and then stepped back again. Or the dog didn't move. Not immediately. Its eyes tracked him, but not the food. Caleb nodded slightly, as if confirming something only he understood. "You don't take anything you didn't clear first," he said under his breath. He straightened again. The wind picked up, sweeping loose snow over the ground, softening the edges of everything. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Time didn't press here. It stretched. Finally, the dog moved. Slow. Painfully controlled. Its head lifted a fraction more, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. Not the food, Caleb noticed that immediately, but him. Scent first. Always scent. The body didn't rise fully. Instead, it shifted its weight forward, one paw dragging slightly before finding purchase. It paused again, conserving energy. Every movement calculated. Caleb didn't step forward. Didn't encourage. He just watched. The dog reached the piece of meat. It didn't eat. It lowered its head close enough to smell. Then stopped. Still. Listening. Then, was just as slowly, it backed away, returning to its position, leaving the food untouched. Caleb's jaw tightened, not in frustration, but recognition. "Still screening," he muttered. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Something else. Respect. He had seen that before, in another place, another dog, different eyes, different handler, same hesitation, same discipline. His gaze dropped for a moment, unfocused, not on the snow, not on the tree, but somewhere else entirely. A desert. Heat instead of cold. A call over comms that came half a second too late. He blinked, pulling himself back. The present didn't allow for that kind of drift. Not here. Not now. He shifted his weight again, boots grinding softly into the snow. "I'm not taking you in," he said quietly, almost as if clarifying it to himself. The dog's eyes flicked to him again, still measuring, Not like that. He didn't explain further, because explanations were for people who needed them. Plus, this wasn't one of those situations. The wind eased again, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from somewhere deeper in town. Life continuing, unaware, or pretending to be. Footsteps approached from behind. Heavy, measured, not hurried. Caleb didn't turn immediately. He recognized the rhythm before the voice came. "You planning on standing there all day, Vance?" Sheriff Nolan Briggs stepped into view from the road, boots sinking deep with each step. His coat was thicker today, pulled tight against the cold. Snow clung to the brim of his hat, melting slowly into the lines of his face. He stopped a few paces behind Caleb, arms folding across his chest. Nolan's eyes moved to the dog, then back to Caleb. "You get closer?" he asked. Caleb shook his head once. "Didn't need to." Nolan studied him for a second longer, then nodded faintly. "That thing's still alive," he said. "Yeah. Won't be for long if it stays out here." Caleb didn't answer, because that wasn't entirely true, and both of them knew it. Nolan shifted his stance, boots creaking in the packed snow. "You know what it is, don't you?" Caleb's gaze didn't leave the dog. "Yeah. Not from around here." "No. Not wild either." Caleb let out a slow breath. "No." Nolan rubbed a gloved hand along his jaw, thinking. "Couple of ranchers are getting nervous," he said. "Livestock's been hit. Clean kills. Not eaten." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't look at Nolan, but something in his posture changed. "Not this one," he said. Nolan gave a short, humorless huff. "That what you're hoping?" "That's what I'm seeing." Silence stretched between them. Not tense, just full. Nolan glanced back at the dog, then down at the piece of meat still sitting untouched in the snow. "Doesn't trust you," he said. "No. You gonna keep trying?" Caleb didn't answer right away. His eyes were still on the animal, still watching, still waiting. "I'm not trying to get it to trust me," he said finally. Nolan frowned slightly. "Then what are you doing?" Caleb shifted his stance, shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "I'm letting it decide I'm not a threat." Nolan studied him again, longer this time. Something in his expression softened. Just a little. "Hell of a gamble," he muttered. Caleb didn't disagree. A sudden sound cut through the wind. Sharp, distant. A crack, not thunder, not wood. Something else. Both men reacted instantly. Caleb's head turned toward the forest line. Nolan's hand dropped toward his sidearm without thinking. The dog moved, faster than before. Its head snapped up fully, body tensing, not rising but coiling, as if preparing for something unseen. Its eyes weren't on them anymore. They were fixed on the trees, unblinking, focused. And in that moment, despite the weakness, the wounds, the exhaustion, it didn't look like something dying. It looked like something waiting for a signal. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. Nolan slowly straightened, his eyes still scanning the tree line. "You hear that before?" he asked. Caleb shook his head once. "No." The dog didn't relax, not even slightly. Its breathing had changed, shorter now, controlled, like it was bracing for impact. Caleb's gaze sharpened. He followed the direction of its focus, scanning the forest. Nothing moved. No tracks visible from here. No sound. But something had reached the dog. Something beyond sight. Caleb felt it then. Not fear, not instinct, but recognition of a pattern he hadn't fully seen yet. Not random, not isolated. Connected. He took a slow step back, then another. Not retreating. Repositioning. Nolan noticed. "Something out there?" he asked quietly. Caleb didn't answer immediately. His eyes were still on the trees. "Yeah," he said finally. "What?" Caleb's jaw set. "Not sure yet." That wasn't entirely true, but it was as much as he was willing to say. For now. He looked back at the dog. It hadn't taken its eyes off the forest. Not once, as the piece of meat lay forgotten between them, slowly disappearing under fresh snow. Caleb nodded once, to the dog, to himself. Then he turned. "Don't let anyone come near it," he said as he passed Nolan. Nolan frowned. "That an order?" Caleb didn't stop walking. "No," a pause. "Just advice." Nolan watched him go, then looked back at the animal under the tree. Still watching. Still holding. Still not alone anymore. By the third day, the storm had passed. Not completely. Winter didn't leave this place so easily, but the sky had opened just enough to let light through. A pale, cold sun spread across the snowfields, reflecting off the ground in a way that made everything too bright to look at directly. The town looked almost peaceful. Almost. Caleb Vance stood at the edge of Martha Cole's ranch, boots planted in churned snow that no longer held its shape. The ground here was disturbed deep, uneven impressions where animals had moved, struggled, died. He didn't need to be told where to look. The blood had already marked the place. It wasn't fresh anymore, frozen into dark patches beneath a thin crust of ice. Scattered. Not pooled. That was the first thing he noticed. Not a single point of impact. Multiple. A pattern. Martha stood a few yards behind him, her arms folded tightly across her chest, not for warmth, but for steadiness. She was in her early 60s, though the years had not softened her. Her frame was wiry, compact, built from decades of work rather than comfort. Her gray hair was tied back in a loose knot, strands escaping around her face, catching the light like frost. Her skin bore the marks of wind and time-deep lines around her mouth, eyes that had seen enough loss to stop expecting explanations. "They didn't even eat them," she said. Her voice was rough, but controlled. Caleb didn't turn around. "I can see that." 3 cattle lay in the snow, or what remained of them. The bodies had been opened, not torn apart blindly. The damage was precise, targeted. Muscle groups exposed, not shredded. No panic in the way the ground was disturbed, no frantic stampede, no signs of chaotic struggle. The animals had been taken down quickly, efficiently. Caleb crouched, gloved hand brushing lightly against one of the tracks. Large, deeper than a coyote's, wider, and spaced in a way that made his chest tighten. "They worked together," he said quietly. Martha exhaled through her nose. "That's what I was afraid of." He moved his hand along the edge of the print, tracing without touching too much. The snow was fragile. Evidence disappeared easily out here. "How many?" he asked. "Didn't see them," she replied. "Heard something last night. Thought it was the wind. Came out this morning and found this." Caleb nodded once. That made sense. Whatever had done this didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. Behind them, a truck door slammed. Sheriff Nolan Briggs approached, his boots crunching with more weight than usual. He looked like he hadn't slept much. The lines on his face were deeper today, jaw set tighter than before. He stopped beside Caleb, eyes scanning the scene without surprise. "You see it?" Nolan asked. Caleb didn't look up. "Yeah." Nolan rubbed a hand over his mouth, but then pointed toward the edge of the pasture. "They came from there. Tree line, same direction as the other hits." Caleb followed the line of sight. The forest stood still. Too still. "You're getting more reports?" Caleb asked. Nolan nodded. 2 more ranches. Same story. Clean kills. No feeding. Martha shifted behind them. That's not normal, she said. No, Caleb replied. It's not. Nolan glanced at him sideways. You still think it's not the dog by the road? Caleb shook his head. No. You're sure? Caleb stood slowly, brushing snow from his knees. It wouldn't leave this much behind, he said, and it wouldn't move like this. Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly. Move like what? Caleb looked down at the tracks again. Like they've done it before. Silence settled between them. Not confusion. Understanding. The walk back toward town was quieter than usual. Martha had stayed behind. Not because she wanted to, but because there was work to be done. Fences to repair. That's what was left of her herd to secure. Life didn't pause, even when something broke. Caleb and Nolan walked side by side, neither one in a hurry to fill the silence. You were in K9 Ops? Nolan asked after a while. Caleb didn't look at him. No. But you've seen this before. Caleb exhaled slowly. Something like it. That was all he offered. Nolan didn't push. Men like them understood the difference between what could be said and what should be left alone. They reached the edge of town again. The tree was still there. So was the dog. Caleb slowed his pace instinctively. The animal had shifted again, barely, but enough to show it had remained conscious through the day. The snow around it had melted slightly from body heat, forming a shallow depression. It hadn't moved far, but it hadn't given in either. Nolan stopped a few feet back. You keep coming back, he said. Caleb didn't answer. Because there wasn't a simple reason. Because sometimes recognition wasn't a choice. It was something that happened to you. Caleb stepped forward again. Careful. Measured. The dog's eyes found him immediately, still sharp, still aware, not weaker, not in the ways that mattered. As Caleb moved closer, something changed. Not in the dog's posture, in its focus. Its gaze shifted past him, past Nolan, toward the road behind them. Caleb felt it before he understood it. That subtle shift in attention, the kind that meant something had entered the perimeter. He turned. Nothing was there. Just empty road. Snow. Silence. But when he looked back at the dog, its eyes had narrowed, not in aggression, in recognition. Caleb's pulse slowed, not from calm, but from control. What is it? Nolan asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He stepped back again, widening his view. Something passed through here, he said quietly. Nolan frowned. When? Caleb glanced at the dog. Recently. Nolan scanned the area again, slower this time. I don't see anything. Caleb nodded. Yeah. That supposed to mean something? Caleb looked back at the animal beneath the tree. It means we're late. The words settled heavier than the snow around them. Nolan didn't respond right away, because he understood what that implied. Whatever was out there was moving. And it was moving ahead of them. Caleb crouched again, this time a little closer than before. The dog didn't react with a growl, didn't rise. It just watched him. The space between them had changed. Not safe. Not yet. But different. Caleb reached into his pocket again, pulling out another small piece of food. This time he didn't place it halfway. He set it down closer. Not within reach, but closer than before. Then he pulled his hand back slowly. The dog's nose twitched. Not toward the food. Toward him. Still identifying. Still deciding. Caleb stayed there a moment longer, then stood. He looked at Nolan. "They're not hunting for food," he said. Nolan crossed his arms. "Then what?" Caleb glanced once more at the tracks behind them, at the empty road, at the forest beyond. "They're testing territory." Nolan's expression hardened. "That makes it worse." "Yeah." It did. Caleb turned away again. This time, when he walked, he didn't pause, didn't look back immediately, because something had already begun to form in his mind. Not a plan. Not yet. But a direction. Behind him, the dog shifted, not rising, not following, but adjusting, still facing the road, still watching the place where nothing had been. And yet something had passed. By late afternoon, the light had begun to fade again, not because the sun had set, but because the forest swallowed it early. Caleb Vance moved deeper into the tree line alone. He hadn't told Nolan he was coming out here. Not directly. The sheriff had seen it anyway, in the way Caleb had looked toward the woods' measuring distance, wind direction, terrain. Men who had spent enough time in places where mistakes meant death, learned to recognize intent before it became action. The forest was quiet. Not the natural quiet of winter. Something else. The kind of stillness that came when things chose not to move. Caleb stepped carefully, boots pressing into layers of old snow hardened beneath newer fall. Each step was deliberate. Not slow, just controlled. He wasn't searching blindly, yet he was following a direction that had already taken shape in his mind. The dog's reaction earlier, its focus on something that had passed unseen, had given him a line. Not a trail. A vector. He followed it. Branches hung low, heavy with snow, brushing against his shoulders as he moved through them. The scent of pine was faint, almost buried beneath something sharper metallic. Distant. Not fresh, but not gone. He paused. Lowered himself slightly. There it was again. Not blood. Not exactly. Something older. Caleb shifted his path a few degrees to the right, adjusting instinctively rather than consciously. The trees began to thin, not in a natural clearing, but in a pattern that didn't belong. Straight lines where there should have been irregular growth. Empty spaces where something had once stood. He stepped forward, and the forest gave way to something else. A structure, or what was left of one. The remains of a compound sat half-buried beneath snow and time. Wood and metal twisted together in shapes that had once been purposeful. Fences sagged inward. Posts leaned at unnatural angles. Rust had eaten through anything that hadn't burned first. Caleb didn't need a sign to know what this place had been. His body recognized it before his mind finished processing. Training ground. Containment. Control. He stepped through what used to be an entry point. No gate remained, only the memory of one in the spacing between broken posts. Inside, the snow lay uneven, disturbed. Not recently, but not forgotten either. Old tracks layered over older ones, preserved in compressed ice beneath the fresh surface. He crouched again, brushing away a thin layer with his gloved hand. The marks beneath were clearer. Pads. Claws. Multiple. Moving in and out. Returning. Caleb exhaled slowly. "They came back," he murmured. Of course they did. Places like this didn't just disappear. They lingered. In memory. In instinct. In whatever part of a creature didn't understand that it had been abandoned. And he moved further in. Rows of what had once been enclosures lined the interior. Most had collapsed inward, their frames broken, mesh torn or melted away. Some still stood partially, enough to suggest their original shape. Small. Reinforced. Not for comfort. For control. Caleb reached one and stopped. His fingers hovered just above the rusted metal. There were markings. Faint. Scratched into the surface not by time, but by repetition. Claw marks, at a height that suggested standing reach. The lines were deep, not random attempts, over and over again. Caleb's jaw tightened. They tried, he said under his breath. The wind shifted. A faint current moved through the ruins, carrying with it a sound so soft it barely existed. A breath. Not his. Caleb froze. Every muscle in his body locked, not in panic, but in precision. Listening. The forest didn't move. The compound didn't speak. But something was there. He didn't turn immediately. Turning too fast broke patterns. Instead, and he shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his stance so that he could pivot if needed. The sound didn't come again, but the absence of it didn't mean it was gone. It meant it was choosing. Then, from somewhere behind him, low, almost swallowed by the wind, a single step. Soft. Measured. Caleb turned. Not fast, not slow. Exactly as fast as necessary. And there, at the edge of the broken enclosure line, a shape. Still. Watching. It wasn't Rook. This one stood taller, its frame heavier, muscle built beneath a coat that had grown thicker, rougher. Its fur was darker, more shadow than color, blending with the ruins around it. Scars traced along its flank, pale against the dark. Its eyes caught the fading light. Not wild. Not tame. Something between. And in that moment, Caleb understood something with a clarity that settled deep in his chest. These weren't animals that had forgotten. They were animals that had remembered too much. The dog didn't move closer. It didn't retreat either. It held position, mirroring him. Caleb straightened slowly, allowing the movement to be seen. No sudden gestures. No challenge. Just acknowledgement. The animal's ears twitched. Forward. Not flat. Curious. Assessing. Caleb let his arms hang loosely at his sides, fingers relaxed, not reaching for anything. "You're not hunting," he said quietly. The words disappeared into the cold air. The dog's head tilted just a fraction, not in confusion, in evaluation. Caleb felt the weight of that gaze. Measured. Compared. He had felt it before, on rooftops, in narrow corridors where every step could trigger something unseen, being studied not as prey, but as a variable. He shifted one foot back, not retreating, rebalancing. The dog's muscles tightened slightly, not aggressive. Ready. Caleb noticed everything, the way it distributed its weight, the angle of its stance, the control. This wasn't chaos. This was structure, broken, but still there. "You had a handler," Caleb said. No reaction. But the silence deepened. "You had orders." Still nothing. The wind moved through the compound again, carrying fragments of sound loose metal tapping softly against wood, distant branches creaking under the cold. The dog's gaze flickered for a second, toward the forest beyond the compound, then back to Caleb. That was enough. Not alone. Caleb understood. There were others. He didn't ask how many, didn't need to. He took another step back, slow, measured. The dog didn't follow, but its posture shifted, subtle, controlled, maintaining distance without breaking contact. A boundary, not to be crossed. Not yet. Caleb nodded once, a gesture so small it could have meant nothing, or everything. Then he turned, deliberately. He walked back the way he had come, not rushing, not hesitating. He didn't look over his shoulder, because he already knew. The dog would be watching, not to attack, not to chase, to remember. The forest closed around him again, branches swallowing the outline of the compound behind him. The silence returned. But it wasn't empty anymore. It carried weight, connection. Caleb stepped back onto the outer path, boots pressing into the layered snow. His breathing remained steady, controlled. But something had shifted. Not fear, not certainty. Something in between. Understanding. The dog at the tree wasn't an outlier. It was a fragment. A piece of something larger. Something that had once been organized, disciplined, and then left to become something else. Caleb paused at the edge of the forest, looking back once, not at the compound, but at the space it occupied in his mind. Then he turned toward town. The light had faded further now, shadows stretching longer across the snow. By the time he reached the road again, the air had grown colder, sharper. The tree stood where it always had. The dog beneath it still alive, still watching. Caleb slowed. But this time, he didn't stop. Not right away. Because now he knew something he hadn't before. This wasn't about one animal. It was about all of them. All. And whatever they had become. They weren't done yet. The night came early again. In northern Montana, darkness didn't wait for permission. It settled like a decision already made. By the time Caleb Vance reached his cabin, the sky had turned from gray to a deep, suffocating blue. The kind of blue that swallowed depth and distance, leaving only shapes and instincts to navigate what remained. He didn't go inside immediately. Instead, he stopped on the porch, boots heavy with packed snow, shoulders dusted white from the walk back through the trees. His breath came slow, controlled, as it always did. Not because he wasn't tired, but because he had trained himself not to show it, even when no one was watching. The forest behind him had changed, not in sound, in feeling. There was weight there now, presence, not aggressive, not chaotic, intentional. He turned his head slightly, her eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. But something had already decided he was part of it. Caleb stepped inside. The cabin was simple. Wood stove, table, a bed that had seen more nights of silence than sleep. The air inside was warmer, but not comforting. Heat didn't erase what followed him in from outside. He set a piece of wood into the stove, watched the flame catch, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then he moved. Routine. Water. Knife. Check the door. Check the windows. Always the same sequence. Always the same result. Clear. Except tonight, clear didn't feel the same. Outside, the wind shifted. Caleb's head turned instinctively toward the door, not because he heard something, because something had stopped. That absence again, that pause in the natural rhythm of the world. He stepped back outside. Slowly. The cold hit him immediately, sharper now, cleaner. The tree stood where it always had, and beneath it, the dog. Still there, still alive. When Caleb moved off the porch, boots sinking into the fresh layer of snow that had fallen while he was inside. He didn't go straight toward it this time. He approached at an angle, giving space, letting his presence arrive before his body did. The dog's head lifted sooner tonight. Faster. Not strong, but responsive. Its amber eyes locked onto him, clearer than before. The fog of exhaustion hadn't lifted entirely, but something had sharpened beneath it. Awareness. Recognition. Caleb stopped a few steps closer than he had allowed himself before. The distance between them had changed. Not gone, but smaller. He crouched slowly, lowering himself without breaking eye contact, careful not to make the movement feel like pressure. "You're still here," he said quietly. The dog didn't move, but its breathing shifted. Less shallow, more controlled. Caleb reached into his pocket again, pulling out another piece of dried meat. This time he didn't set it halfway, but he placed it just outside the dog's reach. Then he withdrew his hand. And waited. The wind moved through the branches above, shaking loose snow that fell softly around them. Time stretched again, long enough that most people would have mistaken stillness for nothing. But Caleb knew better. Stillness was never empty. The dog moved. Not immediately, but deliberately. Its front leg extended, dragging slightly before finding grip. Its body followed, muscles trembling under strain, not from weakness alone, but from effort held too long. It didn't look at the food first. It looked at Caleb, held his gaze, measured, then lowered its head. Slowly, its nose reached the edge of the meat. Paused. Inhaled. And for the first time, it took it. Not greedily, not desperate, controlled. It pulled the piece back, retreating a few inches, keeping distance even in acceptance. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, didn't break the moment. He simply watched. Because this wasn't feeding an animal. This was permission. What a sound cut through the night. Not loud, not sudden, but wrong. A low, distant series of movements, too synchronized to be random, too quiet to be careless. The dog froze, mid-chew. Its body locked, not from fear, but from recognition. Then, slowly, it lifted its head. Not toward Caleb, toward the forest. And what Caleb saw in its eyes in that moment wasn't warning. Wasn't panic. It was something far more dangerous. It was connection. The dog swallowed. Not the food. The moment. Then it shifted. For the first time since Caleb had seen it, it didn't return to its original position beneath the tree. It stood. Not fully upright, its weight still uneven, shoulder favoring slightly, but standing nonetheless. Its posture changed. Subtly, but unmistakably. No longer just holding ground. Now it was aligning. Caleb felt the shift immediately. The space between them changed again. Not smaller, more defined. The dog's ears angled forward, body oriented toward the tree line behind Caleb's cabin. What its breathing slowed further, not relaxed, but regulated. Caleb turned his head slightly. He didn't need to see them. Not yet, he already understood. "They're here," he said under his breath. The dog didn't react to the words, but it didn't deny them either. Caleb stood. Slow. Measured. He didn't step closer to the dog. He stepped slightly to the side, creating a line of sight between them and the forest. The night pressed in around them. The cabin behind him stood quiet, unaware, or pretending to be. The dog took a step. Small, controlled, closer to Caleb than before. Not touching, not trusting, but no longer separate. Caleb noticed. Didn't acknowledge it, not outwardly, but something in his chest tightened again. Familiar. Unwelcome. Hope. He pushed it down. This wasn't that. Not yet. The forest shifted. Barely. A shadow moved between trees, too fluid to be wind, too grounded to be illusion. Then another. Spacing. Formation. Caleb's jaw set. He didn't reach for a weapon. Didn't raise his hands. He stood. Still. Visible. The dog beside him mirrored the stillness. Two figures against the snow. Waiting. Watching. The shapes in the forest stopped at the edge of the tree line. They didn't advance. They didn't retreat. They observed. Caleb felt their eyes on him, multiple, layered, calculating, the same way he had felt that lone dog in the compound. Only now, there were more. He exhaled slowly, letting the breath leave without tension. No challenge, no fear, just presence. The dog beside him shifted again, placing its weight more evenly, as if reminding itself of something it had once known. A command. A role. A purpose. Caleb didn't give one. He wouldn't. Not yet. The silence stretched. Long enough that it became something else entirely. A line. Drawn not in snow, but in choice. Finally, the shadows moved. Not forward. Back. One by one, the shapes receded into the forest, disappearing the same way they had come. Without sound, without trace. The pressure lifted. Not gone? Just distant again. Caleb didn't move immediately. Neither did the dog. They stood there, side by side, not together, not apart. Until the night settled back into something that resembled normal. The dog lowered itself slowly, returning to the ground, but not in the same place. Closer. Still angled toward the forest. Still watching. But different. Caleb glanced down at it. For the first time, he allowed himself to see not just what it was, but what it had been, and what it still might be. "You didn't leave," he said quietly. The dog's ear twitched. That was all. But it was enough. Caleb turned back toward the cabin, stepping slowly, giving the moment space to remain what it was. Behind him, the dog did not follow. But it did not look away either. And somewhere in the distance, deep in the forest where the light never reached, something had shifted. Not the balance. Not yet. But the beginning of one. Morning did not arrive gently. It broke through the trees in sharp fragments of light, reflecting off the snow in blinding shards that forced the eyes to narrow, forced the body to wake whether it wanted to or not. Caleb Vance was already awake. He hadn't slept much. Not because he couldn't, because something in him had refused to. He sat at the edge of his bed, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped together. The room around him was still, the faint crackle of dying embers in the stove, the only sound that suggested time had passed at all. Outside, the world had reset. At least, that was what it looked like. Fresh snow had covered the tracks from the night before. The line between what had happened and what remained had been erased, at least to anyone who didn't know where to look. Caleb stood slowly, her muscles responding without complaint. Habit. Years of training had taught his body to function regardless of what his mind carried. He stepped outside. The cold hit him immediately, clean and unforgiving. The tree stood ahead, unchanged, and beneath it, the dog. Still there, still watching. But something was different. Caleb saw it in the way the animal held itself. Not stronger, not fully, but more present. The exhaustion hadn't disappeared, but it no longer owned the body the way it had before. The dog had shifted again during the night, closer to the open space between the tree and the cabin. Closer to him. Not by much, but enough. Caleb walked forward, boots pressing into untouched snow. He didn't approach directly. He angled again, maintaining the invisible boundaries that had formed between them over the past days. The dog's eyes followed him. No growl, no warning, just awareness. Caleb stopped within a distance that would have felt impossible even yesterday. He crouched slowly. You stayed, he said quietly. The dog's ear flicked. It didn't answer. But it didn't deny it either. Caleb reached into his pocket again, pulling out another piece of food. This time he didn't place it on the ground immediately. He held it. Visible. Not offering. Not withholding. Just present. The dog's gaze dropped briefly to the food, then returned to Caleb. That mattered more. Caleb lowered his hand and placed the food on the snow closer than ever before. Within reach. Then he withdrew. The dog moved. Not slowly this time. Not fast either. Just directly. It stepped forward, weight still uneven but controlled, each movement more stable than the last. It stopped short of the food, nose twitching, then lifted its head again. Looking at him. Checking. Caleb didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't break the moment. The dog lowered its head again, took the food, and this time, it didn't retreat. It remained where it was. Standing. Close. And Caleb exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not yet. But something had shifted. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It came in inches. The town had begun to change its tone. By mid-morning, word had spread beyond Martha's ranch. More reports, more unease. People moved differently now. Quicker. Quieter. Eyes scanning edges instead of focusing on paths. Sheriff Nolan Briggs found Caleb near the road again. "You're gonna tell me you've got a handle on this?" Nolan asked, stepping up beside him. Caleb didn't answer immediately. His eyes were still on the dog. It stood now, not lying, not retreating, simply existing in the space between wild and something else. "I've got a direction," Caleb said. Nolan let out a short breath. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No." Nolan nodded once. "Good." Silence settled again. Then Nolan shifted his weight. "I'm putting a line out," he said. "If anything crosses it, anything, I take it down." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "That's not going to solve it. It'll protect people. For now." Nolan turned to look at him. "You got a better option?" Caleb didn't answer. Not because he didn't, because saying it out loud would make it real, and he wasn't sure yet if it should be. The dog moved again. Not toward Caleb, not toward Nolan. Toward the forest. It took 2 slow steps, then stopped. Its body stiffened, not in fear, not in aggression. In recognition. Then, without warning, it made a sound. Not a growl, not a bark. A low, controlled vocalization, short, deliberate. A signal. Caleb felt it in his chest before his mind caught up. He had heard that sound before, not here, not in this life, in another place. Another time. A command. Or the echo of one. Nolan looked at Caleb sharply. "What the hell was that?" Caleb didn't respond right away. His eyes were locked on the dog. "It wasn't random," he said quietly. The dog didn't repeat the sound. It simply stood there, ears forward, a gaze fixed on the tree line, waiting, listening. Caleb stepped forward, closer than he had ever been. The distance between them closed, not fully, but enough that he could see the details he had only guessed at before. The scars along the dog's flank, the way the fur had grown unevenly over healed wounds, the tension in its muscles, not fear, but readiness. "You remember," Caleb said under his breath. The dog's eyes flicked to him, and for a moment, just a moment, something softened. Not weakness. Recognition. Caleb felt it like a pressure behind his ribs. "You weren't left," he continued quietly. "You were cut loose." The dog held his gaze. No movement. No denial. Caleb nodded once. That was enough. Behind them, Nolan shifted again. "You planning on explaining any of this?" he asked. Caleb straightened slowly. "Not yet." Nolan exhaled sharply. "That's getting old." "Yeah," Caleb replied. "I know." He looked back at the dog one more time, and then toward the forest. "They're not just surviving," he said. "They're organizing." Nolan's expression darkened. "That makes them a threat." Caleb didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. "It makes them something else," he said. Nolan didn't like that answer. It showed. But he didn't push, because something in Caleb's tone made it clear. This wasn't speculation. It was recognition. The dog lowered itself slowly back to the ground, but not in the same way as before. Not collapsed, not guarding alone, positioned, facing the forest, but angled slightly toward Caleb, a shift so small most people wouldn't notice. Caleb did, and he understood what it meant. Not belonging, not submission. Something harder to define. Something earned. He stepped back, giving the space room to exist. Nolan watched the exchange, eyes narrowing slightly. "You think it'll stay?" he asked. Caleb didn't look at him. "It already has." That wasn't an answer, but it was the truth. The wind moved again, and carrying with it the faintest trace of something deeper in the forest. Not sound, not scent, just presence. Caleb turned his head slightly. The line was still there, invisible, but real, and it was getting thinner. Winter did not leave all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly, as if the land itself was unsure whether it was safe to soften again. The snow had begun to thin along the edges of the road. Patches of frozen earth showed through where footsteps had passed too often to be erased. The air still held the bite of cold, but it no longer cut as deep. Change had come. But it hadn't settled yet. Caleb Vance stood outside his cabin, watching the horizon without really seeing it. He had not slept again. Not fully. The kind of sleep that required trust. He hadn't earned that yet. Not from the world around him, and not from himself. Behind him, the cabin door remained open, just slightly. Not an accident, a choice. The dog lay a few feet from the threshold, not beneath the tree anymore. What that alone would have been enough to shift everything. It wasn't curled up. It didn't relax the way a house dog might, legs tucked, body at ease. It lay angled, half toward the forest, half toward the door. Still guarding, still choosing. Its coat had changed over the past days, not in color, but in life. The dullness had begun to lift, replaced by a faint sheen where the fur had started to settle back into place. The wounds had not disappeared, but they had stopped worsening. Survival had taken hold again. Caleb glanced down at it. "You crossed the line," he said quietly. The dog didn't lift its head, but its ear flicked once. That was all. And it was enough. The town had not settled the way the snow had. If anything, the tension had grown sharper, more defined. Sheriff Nolan Briggs had followed through. There was a perimeter now, not marked clearly, but known. Men had been told where not to go. Rifles had been brought out of storage, not for hunting, for something else. And Caleb had seen it in their eyes when he passed through town that morning. Fear. But not the kind that made people run. The kind that made them stand their ground, even if they didn't understand what they were standing against. Martha Cole had said less than usual. Her hands had been steady, but her gaze had lingered on the tree line longer than before. "They're still out there," she had said. Caleb hadn't corrected her, because still wasn't the right word anymore. "They're choosing when to be seen," he had replied. She hadn't asked what that meant. Because she already knew, the decision didn't come all at once. It formed, piece by piece, in the way the dog had stayed, in the way the others had watched and withdrawn, in the way the tracks had circled but never crossed into town. There was a boundary, not enforced by walls, not marked by signs, but understood. Caleb stood at that boundary now. The forest stretched ahead of him, dark even in daylight, as branches still heavy with the last grip of winter. It looked the same as it had days ago, but it wasn't. He could feel it, a shift beneath the surface, not chaos, structure. He stepped forward, one pace, then another. Behind him, the dog rose. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with purpose. Its weight settled more evenly now, the limp in its movement reduced, but not gone. It followed, not at his side, not close enough to touch. Just there. Maintaining distance. Maintaining choice. Caleb didn't look back. He didn't need to. They walked like that for a while. Two figures moving toward something neither of them fully named. The forest accepted them. Branches parted where they needed to. Snow gave way beneath their weight. And deeper inside, the silence changed. The dog stopped, mid-step, no sound, no warning, just stopped. Caleb felt it immediately. He halted without turning. The space between them held still for a heartbeat. Then the dog moved forward, not past him, not ahead, beside him, for the first time. Close enough that Caleb could feel the heat of its body through the cold. Close enough that the line between them blurred. Caleb exhaled slowly. Didn't react outwardly, but inside, something shifted. Not relief. Not victory. Recognition. He glanced down briefly. The dog didn't look at him. Its eyes were fixed ahead. But its position had changed. No longer separate, no longer observing from distance. Now, aligned. Caleb nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "All right," he said under his breath. They moved again. Together. The deeper they went, the clearer the signs became. Tracks layered over older tracks. Not random. Structured. Paths formed by repetition. Patterns carved into the forest floor. The compound lay ahead. He could feel it before he saw it. The same weight as before. But different now. Not abandoned. Occupied. The remains of the old training ground emerged from between the trees, broken structures casting long shadows across the snow. And this time, they weren't alone. Our shapes moved at the edges, not hiding, not fully revealed, waiting. The larger dog stepped forward first, the one Caleb had seen before. Heavier frame, dark coat, scars tracing across its body like a map of survival. Its posture was controlled, not aggressive, not submissive, balanced. It stopped several yards away. The others remained behind it, partially obscured by shadow and distance. The dog beside Caleb didn't move, didn't retreat, didn't advance. It held. Caleb stood. Still. Open. Not challenging. Not yielding. The moment stretched, long enough that it became something else, a decision point. The larger dog's gaze shifted, from Caleb to the dog beside him, held, measured. Something passed between them, not visible, not audible, but real. Caleb didn't interrupt it, didn't step in, because this part wasn't his. The dog beside him took one step forward, not toward the larger dog, into the space between, a line, invisible, but present. It didn't lower its head, or didn't bare its teeth. It simply stood. The larger dog held its gaze. Seconds passed. Then, it stepped back. Once. Slow, controlled. The others followed. Not scattered, not fleeing, withdrawing. As one. Caleb felt the shift. Not in the ground, not in the air, in the balance. The line had been tested and held. He exhaled quietly. The dog beside him remained where it was, watching, until the last shape disappeared into the trees. Only then did it turn its head slightly. Not toward the forest. Toward him. Caleb met its gaze. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not the town. Not the forest. Not the past. Just that space. That choice. He nodded once. "You're staying," he said. Not a question. The dog didn't answer. It didn't need to. It turned, walked back the way they had come, not looking over its shoulder, not hesitating. Caleb followed, not leading, not commanding, just moving. Behind them, the forest closed again, silent, but no longer watching the same way. Something had changed, not ended, but changed. By the time they reached the edge of the trees, the light had softened again. The town lay ahead, still cautious, still uncertain, but intact. Caleb stopped at the boundary, looked once more at the forest, then stepped forward. The dog walked beside him, not ahead, not behind, with him. And for the first time since he had come to this place, Caleb Vance did not feel like something left behind. There are battles we never see. Not the kind fought with weapons or shouted commands, but the quiet ones, the ones carried in the eyes of those who have endured more than they were ever meant to. Some walk on 2 legs, some on 4, and sometimes they find each other not by accident, but by something greater than chance. Maybe we call it instinct. Maybe we call it timing. But sometimes, it feels like something else entirely. A hand we cannot see, guiding 2 broken paths to cross at the exact moment they are needed most. Because healing does not always come in loud miracles. Sometimes, it comes in silence, in patience, in the decision to stay, when everything in you has learned to leave. God does not always remove the storm, but He often sends someone or something to stand beside us in it. And maybe that is the miracle. It's not that the pain disappears, but that we are no longer facing it alone. If this story touched something in you, then it was meant to. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, because every voice matters. And every story connects us in ways we don't always understand. And if you believe in stories that heal, in quiet strength, and in the unseen ways God works through even the most unexpected bonds, consider subscribing to the channel. May God watch over you, guide your path, and bring peace to whatever battles you are fighting right now.